break a leg, y'all.
Thank you.
It's like industry lingo.
Welcome, everybody. We are just going to take a minute to allow folks to make their way in from the waiting room.
I'm saying hi too, even though we're not supposed to. It's nice to know you're all here and though we can't see you. Thank you for taking your Thursday night for a little bit of mental health, a little bit of Zen, a little bit of sanity.
A little bit of Xanax. Welcome.
No, we're not doing Xanax, Bea.
I'm just kidding. You're not, Betsy, but I know I'm not either. I'm not either.
This is the new world of the pre-Zoom. It's that awkward
Moment.
pause, you know,
Mhm.
where people don't really know what to do with themselves, but they're maybe getting a glass of wine or eating.
I did a webinar today where they played music during this time in order to fill
I was
that
just
space.
thinking there
Should
should
have
be
done
music.
that. Have a Nagila or yeah.
There's something festive. Okay, well, I am going to honor the time of everyone who came into the waiting room on time. My name is Rabbi Nicole Auerbach. I know that I've met many of you, but not all of you. I'm the Director of Congregational Engagement at Central Synagogue, which means that I am generally in charge of things adults do other than go to services. So if you are interested in such things, I always love to meet people in person. And tonight we are really here because we know that a lot of us are not okay right now. As much as when someone, one of our friends says, "How are you doing?" and we say, "Fine," we know that there's a lot underneath that fine. And that this has really not been an easy time for anyone. And we take that seriously. Before we even get started, want to let you know that the clergy at Central Synagogue, we care deeply about you. We do not want you to feel alone, and that we are here as a resource and a way to connect you to other resources if we can be helpful. We're really here tonight because we think that addressing mental health challenges is just as important as addressing physical health challenges, and we really want to be here to support you. To that end, if you are in, I know we're all in a lot of different places tonight. If you are in crisis tonight, I want you to be aware that help is always available. And for immediate support, you can call the crisis text line by texting Coalition to 741-741. I will put that in the chat as well. Please do take care of yourself because we care about you. So tonight we are here. Our dear friend, Abby Pogrebin, hardly needs an introduction. She is our immediate past president at Central Synagogue. She is a journalist and author of 3 books, including My Jewish Year, 18 Holidays, One Wandering Jew, which is fantastic. You should read it. She often moderates public events for the Manhattan JCC, the Stryker Center, UJA, and lots of other places. And in all of that, she really brings not only an honesty, but also compassion and curiosity that I think is really the hallmark of her work. And so I can't imagine a better person to lead us in this conversation tonight. So I'll turn it over to Abby.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and hello to everyone. Rabbi Auerbach, I should say. These rabbis became my friends when I was president, so it's hard for me to go back to the formality, but I do want to give her a huge shout out because Rabbi Auerbach has been pivotal in making this series happen. and also to Rabbi Angela Bookdahl, who is on sabbatical, but I know is on the call right now on this Zoom. We have forbid her for being on camera because at least on sabbatical, you should have the luxury of being in your pajamas. But hello to our senior rabbi, Angela Bookdahl, and the whole central team, especially Lauren Dickel, who put this together, and to our panelists, who I've had the privilege and the joy of pre-interviewing a little bit, where I kept saying, stop, 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 please save that for the actual event. They do important work. They speak candidly, and not only are they going to answer my questions, but they're going to answer yours tonight. I want to start by, I know these intros take a little bit of time, but I want you to know who's here with you. And particularly, I think at a moment when so many of us who feel like, I'll speak for myself, we're fairly high functioning and try to think that we have it all together. This has tested us in ways that I think none of us ever imagined or predicted. And they are all going to, I think, offer perspective that that will resonate with all of you or many of you. But I want to encourage you not just to follow what Rabbi Auerbach said of pursuing extra help and support if you are feeling particular difficulty and hurdles right now, but to know that these three also are connected either individually or to organizations that can also help. So let's start with Catie Cole. Wave your hand, Catie, just so we can know that you're there. She is the founder of How Are You Really? And frankly, we kind of stole the title for this program from her. So I'm giving you that kudos, Catie. Thank you for letting us. How Are You Really is a mental health storytelling platform focusing on sharing uplifting, honest stories that bring us together by embracing and acknowledging our mental health experiences. She is also a co-founder of the Mental Health Coalition. I will just give a shout out to her dad, Kenneth Cole, who I had the privilege of interviewing years ago for my first book, Stars of David, and taught me a huge amount in my own Jewish journey. So in addition to everything that he's contributed to the world, I just think personally, he was my teacher as well. The Mental Health Coalition is made up of leading organizations, brands, and individuals who have joined forces to destigmatize all mental health conditions by changing the way people talk about and care for their mental health. Catie studied psychology at Harvard, and she's passionate about the therapeutic value of narrative therapy via storytelling. Dr. Betsy Stone, where are you, Betsy? I hope you're going to let me call you by your first name. Just know that I know you're a doctor. Retired clinical psychologist who currently teaches as an adjunct lecturer at HUC JIR. We know that that is the seminary for all Reformed clergy, and Central is the beneficiary of everything that HUC does, including what Betsy Stone does. Her classes include human development for educators, the spiritual life cycle, adolescent development, and families in crisis. She has also taught pastoral counseling. She consults on program development and community building. And during this COVID crisis, she's led webinars on trauma resilience and post-traumatic growth for congregations and Hillels and et cetera, et cetera. She's basically kind of been there in the trenches in these last 8 months. Oh, she told me to say she does not like chocolate in any form. Betsy, we part ways right there. I'm sorry, we can revisit that. Bea Arthur, hello Bea. Great to talk to you, great to see you again. LMHC is a Columbia University trained psychotherapist, entrepreneur, and author whose career took off at the intersection of psychology and technology. Her last company, called In Your Corner, formerly it was called Pretty Padded Room, which I love as a title, was a pioneer of the e-therapy movement, which has taken off now. I mean, you were prescient in that regard, and was one of the first to deliver mental health care online. They were called the Future of Therapy by MTV and competed on ABC's Shark Tank. And Bea's latest venture, The Difference, takes her mission further because she provides on-demand access to live therapists as Amazon's first mental health Alexa skill. Bea was the first African-American female founder accepted to the prestigious Y Combinator Accelerator. She was named an entrepreneur to bet on by Newsweek magazine and one of Bumble's 100 most inspiring New Yorkers, and she is, and welcome everybody. That's a mouthful. I'm gonna stop talking soon. Thank you, Bea, for the snaps. I've learned that means something good. So Bea, so let's just actually, I wanna actually start with Bea, if I could, if you can unmute. Let's just, before we get to any solutions, let's just get to the landscape. And I know we all have our own words for what we're going through and what these challenges are. What are you seeing though? And as candidly as you're brave enough to say, like what do you think that has really reared its head in these last 8 months? What are the challenges for people of any age, but however you want to tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a crisis. I always greet people and I say happy apocalypse, just because it's literally been like an undoing breakdown in every sense of the world. I mean, just relentless. I couldn't even tell you what happened in March anymore. So first we had collective shock, then we had collective fear, and then, people reacted to things at different times. And yeah, several different crises. So everybody's been on their own Corona roller coaster. And yeah, everybody's home and depressed. So obviously online therapy is really hot right now. But there's so many different experiences. Everybody has had their own unique breakdown. I have had 3 good cries where I cried so hard that my eyes hurt for a whole week. So if you haven't broken down yet, I highly recommend it, and just welcome it. It would be weird if you didn't feel bad right now. The main thing that I've been telling people is that if you come out of this doing things the same way that you were doing them before, then you did Corona wrong. So, therapists like to embrace change. Every good thing that happened in your life happened because something changed. So if you were still alive and employed and you kept your family alive, you get an A++ for this year. And just write it off and we'll see you at Valentine's Day.
I just want to follow up on that for a minute, because I think even though you're smiling, and I love that you actually find joy, give us joy, even when we're talking about hard things. I think that what a lot of us are feeling is, if we feel blessed, we sort of feel guilty about feeling bad. That like, who am I to complain or feel dark or feel kind of hopeless or feel aimless when I am still alive and I still do have my family and I still do have a roof over my head and I'm not on a food pantry line.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you address something like that kind of ambivalence?
Well, this is what I'm really grateful to see, actually. When everything gets taken away from us and we can see how much we're left with, we realize that that's all that actually mattered. We have been adding so much on our lives. And to be honest, we were doing too much. We couldn't have been working harder. We couldn't have been watching more content. We couldn't have been spending less time with our families. So we really did need to pause. Some people call it Rona, Miss Rona. I like to call it the great pause. So if you can just stop and be appreciative, that's the best you can do. People forget, before we had all these things to distract us, all of our energy was taken up by just survival. We spent all day looking for food. We spent all day looking after our kids. We spent all day, just trying to make a fire. So it's okay if you're just surviving right now. It's literally the best that we can ask for yourself. So I don't know why people feel bad about feeling bad. Honor that. It's part of the process. Every emotion deserves equal respect. So you can learn a lot from this pause. So I always encourage people, don't run from your pain. There's a lesson there.
Nice. Betsy, you've written about surge fatigue. Can we just talk about COVID fatigue, or however you want to address some of what Bea said, but like what that sense of, we thought there was a light in the end of the tunnel, the goal keeps getting pushed back.
Keeps moving. Right. Well, I want to comment on something that you all were just talking about, and then I want to do that.
Sure.
I think that the shame that we layer on ourselves on top of the pain that is this experience doesn't actually do anything for us. It's useless. Shame tends to be pretty useless writ large. So, I mean, it's almost as though I say I have 102 fever and you have 101 fever. You still feel terrible, even if it's worse for me. And I don't think that at any level this is a competitive shame sport. Although I think that very often we do competitive shame or competitive pain. What it feels like for me is not what it's going to feel like for me in 15 minutes or in a half an hour. And that is part of the roller coaster, is that this is such our own experiences are so fluid. Shame doesn't add to that. In terms of the question about fatigue, so I think it's really important for us to understand that we are all experiencing some form of trauma. And I'm going to take advantage of the chat box and put a definition of trauma in the chat box, because I think it's actually, will it go to everyone? I think it's actually really important for us to know that what we're experiencing really is extraordinarily painful and ungrounding. That the sense of helplessness, the failure of my coping skills, the diminished sense of myself, all of those things make me feel disconnected from myself in a very powerful way. We are used to being able to rely on ourselves and trusting ourselves. We are used to having power in the world and being competent and feeling like we can make a difference. And all those things have been kind of shot to hell. On top of that, we have no real recovery time. And this is what, Abby, what your question kind of leads me to. What's supposed to happen in a crisis is that I'm supposed to kind of have a surge. It makes my immune system work better. I get activated and I act, and then I'm supposed to be able to calm myself down. What's not happening for us now is that calming myself down. So I go from surge to surge to surge. The sense is crisis to crisis to crisis without any real recovery time. Our bodies are not designed to do that. We're just not built that way. I don't think that any, I don't think any animals are designed to be in kind of a constant state of crisis. And our crisis has not just been COVID. It's been COVID, it's been the election, it's been racial injustice, it's been health injustice. If you live on the Upper West Side, it's been the Lucerne. It is this kind of ongoing sense of, I have to keep looking at myself and saying, who am I? That's a really unpleasant, uncomfortable experience that we don't have recovery time for.
Yeah. And I want to circle back in a second, Betsy, to a few things you said, but I want to go to Catie. I want to go back to 10,000 feet and the title of the organization you started. How are you really? Because I feel like what you're getting at, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is something we don't, when we ask, we're not really asking of each other, is how are you? How are you doing? So can you just address sort of why you picked it and why for you it's resonant as something that is kind of universal?
Yeah. So I think that we ask people every day how they're doing. And that question has become a pleasantry at this point. And we infrequently respond with, nor do we expect others to respond with how they're actually doing in that moment. It's important to recognize that so much of individuals' authenticity and openness is contextual. You're more likely to disclose your feelings to a friend than maybe a mere colleague, or in a personal, intimate setting than in a crowded space, and more likely over the phone than text. So there are all of these variables depending on the individual, but it's right now more important than ever that we're checking in on each other, and we're doing so in an authentic way, and we're checking in on ourselves. And I think the first step to a more mutually open, honest conversation, and asking that question in a way that really gets people to feel comfortable opening up and telling you how they're really feeling, is by setting the example yourself. So we as human beings are primed to mirror one another's behaviors and actions, and disclosure is most definitely no exception to that. So if I disclose to you, you're most likely, more likely to do the same with me. So I think it's important that by answering how are you really yourself more honestly, you'll be able to invite and inspire others to do the same.
And what would you say from your perspective is the barriers to people, first of all, answering that honestly? And I think what even is more curious is that sometimes people don't want to actually know the answer who are asking. Like they're almost afraid to take in someone else's pain.
Right. And I think that's why, to an extent, the context is so important. I think that's true that some people are not necessarily wanting you to be open and honest, and are just wanting to move on to whatever the objective of the conversation is. But I think that there is a time and a place, and it's important for all of us to take that time to reflect, to think about how we're actually doing, because if we don't have the ability to put words to those feelings and to talk with loved ones about those emotions, then we're not going to be able to process them ourselves.
It's a great point. It also makes me feel like things would feel very different if we were having more honest exchanges and they weren't just pleasantries. And in a way, the pleasantries are even more they compound the difficulty in some ways.
Absolutely.
Betsy, let me just circle back to you for a second. You were talking about how the surge that we're not used to the kind of relentlessness of this. I just want to push again, because I can imagine what some people are thinking, at least I am, is that we have to be careful about saying we're suffering. You know, it's like when you talk about it in Buddhism, because people are really suffering, you know, and when you look at, you know, like, are we sort of entitled to even that word, or even the frame of struggle and pain? And when we sort of say, I should be okay, I should be okay. I mean, some people, in a way, it's not that it's easier when it's more clear that you actually have an illness that is very clear and very specific, or you have, you know, or you've lost your job. It's very clear. It's not better, but it's, in a way, there is no ambiguity about what you're facing. Whereas for some of us, this is a much more internal sense of extremis.
So you're absolutely right. We have, as a culture, losses that we respect more and honor more than others. That doesn't mean that the experience of the loss is dramatically different. So clearly, the death of a pet is not as bad as the death of a spouse, duh. But the death of a pet is still bad. And when we do this rank ordering of my entitlement to feel bad, what we're really doing is saying, I feel bad and I shouldn't. Well, it's kind of too late for that. What I think may be much more helpful for us than this kind of competitive suffering, which I just don't think is useful, or competitive shame, is to think to some degree about what I've learned and what I've gained. That there is no question in my mind that any kind of event, any kind of experience that challenges my vision of myself in the world has the potential to change me for the better, not just for the worse. That there is no question in my mind that for all of us, there are aspects of this awful year, and it has been an awful year, but there have been aspects of it that we would like to hold on to, things I've learned, work I've done, ways I've helped. And I think for each of us, that really exists and is an important thing for us to value. I think we've learned, for example, that our focus on achievement may not be as important as our focus on relationships. I think that's pretty clear to lots of us.
Yeah.
And so that, look, there are no lives without pain. They just don't make them. The question is, does the pain lead to growth? Or does the pain become planted as pain? I think that pain without growth is really a reasonably good definition of suffering. And pain with growth is a reasonably good definition of psychological maturity. I don't know. What do you think about that, Bea? Am I overstating that?
Well, I want you to answer her, but I also want to just reframe a little bit, because you talked when I listened in your great TED talk, and Betsy just talked about kind of competitive suffering, but you talked about the culture of comparison, which I thought was such a kind of resonant idea. And that was obviously a pre-COVID talk, but I'm finding that it's still very active even now. That sense of like, what is somebody else achieving, accomplishing, or, you know, how are they doing this better? Or maybe how do you define that culture of comparison, and why is it corrosive?
Yeah, I mean, the culture of comparison, it's interesting to compare to it now, because I was talking about literally, I worked in social work agencies, like literally in the hood, with people living in like 8 to a room and making 200 a week. And I've also worked with, hedge funders. One of my very, very first clients was like a hedge fund guy who got laid off after the Great Recession, like in 2008. And what I learned from those experiences, which were literally back to back, is that all pain is relative, for sure, but all pain is real. you know, and just because you have something doesn't mean you shouldn't feel bad. In fact, what you resist returns to you, and you're using that kind of feeling bad about feeling bad as a reason to be unkind to yourself. And when you do that to yourself, it extends to all your relationships. So that's why forgiving yourself, having compassion to yourself, really honoring all of your feelings, being the mother or the father figure that can, as a coping mechanism, rather than trying to be like, be a big boy, don't cry. Like, who is that for? You need your time to mourn. We've all had a lot of loss this year, even if it's just about your favorite restaurant closing. That's a life that you used to know and enjoy and was part of your identity. Mourn it. You know, we mourn with those who mourn. So that's something that I always want to encourage, like, love yourself through this. Like, if you have anything right now, again, like if you've survived, then like just have extreme gratitude for that. I don't know why you would have anything but guilt. Anything but gratitude. Guilt is useless in this case, you know?
And you also talked when we were speaking before this about what self-care looks like, you know, so it doesn't feel like just this crunchy thing of lighting candles and getting in the bathtub, that it's actually, you know, it's kind of a muscle we have to develop.
Yes.
Can you just talk a little bit about that for those of us who are kind of casting about to cope right now?
Those of us that she leans in and takes notes.
Yeah, I just want to say, when I talked to Bea, he said, Abby, your name stands for baby, B-A-B-Y. And I took it. She was right, because I hadn't sort of prioritized some of this self-care stuff.
Oh, this one, she was so hard on herself. I'm like, we are literally surviving a pandemic. Do you know how many dinosaurs survived the meteor? Not one, not one. So good for you. We made it this far. Why are you, that's all you had to do and you did it, girl. What? She's such a baby. She's got so much to learn, y'all. But yeah, as far as the culture of comparison, I think what this has revealed that Americans in particular also have a culture of avoidance, just not wanting to deal with stuff. And you could see that in the way we leave our lives. You said that even when you mentioned, you were like, oh, people are feeling bad about achievement. And it's like, why should you be achieving anything right now? That's capitalism, girl. It got you fucked up in the head. Like literally, like all you have to do is survive. So one thing is, don't compare yourself. Everybody really does have pain. Like life is about pain. Yeah, I was raised in the church, and that's one thing that I love that they raised us on. Like God isn't there to erase your problems. He's there to help you endure them, you know? And so you will get through this. All troubles are temporary. Like literally, even good things, nothing lasts forever. You will be different on the other side of this. Things are changing. So you might as well be an active part of that chain. And that comes with keeping your blinders on and like really going inside and figuring out what you really do want. Because a lot of us were just like on the hamster wheel, on the treadmill, just kind of going through the motions. It's time to adjust and reset and restructure if necessary. Some people have been moved without their will, certainly not what they wanted, but like I like to look to evolutionary psychology. You know, when it's mating season, they know where to go. They don't be like, oh, should I not go over there? You know, when it's time to go to sleep, they just know. Humans are the only animals that deny their instincts. So if you can't go outside, go inside, travel, journal, love yourself, treat yourself, take goddess baths and light a candle. Sure, that's self-care as well. But also just like honor the full range of your human experience. And just, yeah, that's self-love.
What's in a goddess bath? I just want to understand.
Ooh, girl, so candles, I have candles too. I go to this crystal store downtown. Here's some amethysts and stuff. I do crystals and then I light candles around it and I sage and I like listen to like a meditation from my coach. I also medicate. I smoke a lot of weed. And yeah, it's a goddess bath and I put rose petals in it. And sometimes I say like, when you can't meditate, I like to marinate. So I just like marinate like good thoughts for myself. I'm very vain.
Yeah. All right, I need a page of that. So Catie, I want to get to storytelling for a minute. Because it's kind of, you know, the linchpin or kind of at the core of a lot of what you've built here. And you talk about the importance of sharing our stories, which I could not agree with more, but I think it's in some ways, again, and particularly for certain populations, hard to do because it feels vulnerable. But why do the stories, in your estimation, and as you've seen them, be effective? Like, why does it work?
I think storytelling for all things in life, it's central to our ability to create sense and meaning. And it's through story that our minds form and examine our truths and our beliefs, and they figure out how we relate to others. And by listening to others' stories, we're able to learn and we're able to expand our understandings. We're able to realize that we're not alone. Specifically applying these values of storytelling to mental health, I think that we are able to, as we were talking about before, like assign words to your emotions. And there's a difference between people who define themselves by their problems. Like I am a depressed person, I am an anxious person, as opposed to I'm someone who lives with depression, or I'm someone who lives with anxiety. And that subtle difference really is significant in terms of how you define yourself and how you go about your days in your life, and how you view yourself in reference to other people. So the ability to give meaning to your personal experiences, to come up with those meanings and separate yourself from the problem, to be able to think it through. This can be done by storytelling. This can be done with the pen and paper. This can be done by calling a friend. Maybe a more public way feels right. And it's important just to do what's right for you. But then on the other side of it as well, consuming those stories about people's mental health experiences allows individuals to really recognize they're not alone. It works to destigmatize many conditions, and it inspires people to open up themselves. So it's hopefully a catalyst for the change that we need.
And I want to, Betsy, I do want to get to you on self-care, but for all of you and let's start with Catie, because you just raised something that it made me think of this. The idea of the stigma, which seems to me really stubborn when it comes to using the words mental health. When we were even putting this panel together, I will admit to you that I kept saying, we can't use those words or people aren't going to show up. Like that is, as we say, the Jews say, ashanda. It's a shame. Why am I still having that reaction? Because I feel like it's going to put people off in some way, be a barrier, or even admitting, or a word like loneliness or a word like depression. They still have these associations that I think have evolved for sure. And it helps when all of us confess that we've been there, but there is still that sense of like, I'm actually not going to, there's something about even the words, the terms themselves. So let's start with you, Catie, just on that.
Yeah, I think that it's really important for us to maybe come up with other terms to an extent, which is something the Mental Health Coalition is working to do. But these terms are so inherently stigmatized, and mental health itself in reality is the health of our minds. It's comparable to our physical health, which is not stigmatized and is taken seriously. If you break your leg, you go get an x-ray and you take care of it, and that's what's expected of you. And if you are experiencing trouble within your mind, you similarly should feel comfortable being able to go and see a doctor and take care of that. So I think it's important that we definitely rebrand it to an extent, which is, again, what the coalition's working to do right now. And we'll be launching some important initiatives over the next couple months that will hopefully work towards that. But I think also recognizing that something like anxiety or depression, we all may experience symptoms and be on the spectrum of feeling anxious, but that doesn't mean that we necessarily have an anxiety disorder. So I think it's important for us to realize that as a society as well, and to really educate ourselves as to what these words even mean.
That's great. Betsy. Unmute.
Yep. Sorry. A couple of comments. First of all, I think that when we think about self-care, we tend to think about that as being something which is universal, and that we all do it in the same ways. And that when the pandemic started, everyone I knew was trying yoga, whether we were a yoga person or not. Self-care is actually really much more idiosyncratic than that. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. It doesn't have to be, I'm gonna now start running and train for a marathon. It can be, I stand in the shower for an extra 3 minutes because the water makes me feel better. It can be, I allow myself that piece of chocolate, which I'm not going to do, or something like that, that basically is a message to myself that I have value. That is really what self-care is at its core. It's not a dramatic and extraordinary thing. It's a statement to myself that I perceive myself to have value, and I can take care of myself. And I can feed myself, and I don't mean only physically, but I can feed the parts of me that are in need. I think it is also, I want to piggyback off of something Catie said. I think it's really important for us to not simply be thinking about mental health, but be thinking about wellness writ large. That wellness is a different beast. It is, we use the expression mental health as the antithesis of illness, as opposed to as an example of wellness. And we do know that that there are racial differences and ethnic differences and economic differences in people's access to both healthcare and mental health care. I think as a society, we have to be thinking about the wellness of all of us, and not the wellness of, and not the ways in which we think wellness these days. And finally, and then I promise I'll shut up, or not. We've begun as a culture, probably over the last 20 or 30 years, to use words which were originally pathological to describe normal experiences. So that when I'm sad, I'm depressed. There's something wrong when you're depressed. There is nothing wrong when you're sad. And it is really important for us as a community to begin to think about normal bad feelings as not being crazy. So stress, for example, is normal. Anxiety is not. Sadness is normal. Depression is not. And when we use the words interchangeably, what we actually do is we cheapen the intensity of the bad experience, in deference to kind of almost exaggerating the normal experience. We should all be feeling sad some of the time right now. That's really appropriate.
So let me ask Betsy, what is the difference?
There's so
between sad and depressed. Like for those who are listening, who are like, I'm not sure what I am right now.
Okay, so sad is a blue response to a bad experience, and it could be a long-term bad experience. Depressed is, I have trouble getting out of bed, I have trouble eating, my sex drive is gone, my sleep is terribly disrupted, I am pessimistic about my future and my day, I don't feel hopeful. Most of us are not describing that when we're saying we're depressed. What we're describing is being sad. Yeah. I feel burdened. That's sad. I feel overwhelmed and I can barely move. That's depressed. Okay. And I think the distinction has incredible merit, particularly when we're thinking about our adolescents and young adults who think there's something wrong with them when they just feel bad. That's not to say that there aren't kids who are truly struggling with depression and anxiety. I don't mean to say that, but I think a lot of adolescents and a lot of the experience of being an adolescent has to do with having some bad feelings. Yeah. And that if we allow people to have some bad feelings, we actually strengthen their resilience.
So Bea and Catie, I just want to go to just the platforms that you guys have created and more just this idea, it feels to me like there's a new vocabulary for this that isn't necessarily finding a therapist and walking into a therapist's office. So I'm not saying that Dr. Stone is the old guard, but just because you both have started things in the recent past. Let's start with you, Bea. Just like what do you see as sort of the new mode of people getting help or being helped?
Yeah, well, I'm excited to see that the stigma is being reduced. It's definitely still stubborn. People definitely think something's wrong with you if you go to therapy. And that's what I'm trying to do with the difference, change the conversation about what therapy is and whom it's for, because that's just like Betsy said, people really avoid it like the plague. People like, oh, well, my dad was an alcoholic or I wasn't beat. So it's not that bad. People think that they have to wait until you're in crisis, which is part of the problem. It should be preventative. If it was about wellness, if it was about like adding to your life and self-care, those sad episodes, as Betsy mentioned, which are inevitable, will be less intense and won't be as long in duration if you like have a very strong baseline. So what I've tried to do is really increase access and affordability. I always say therapy is priceless, but it shouldn't be so damn expensive. So both of my companies have dealt with kind of having either corporate partnerships to sponsor the direct to consumer experience, because, I mean, the truth is like nobody, if I'm a therapist, right, and I'm a popular one, and I'd rather not chase a $60 invoice from a health insurance company. I'd rather just charge somebody rich $200, $300 an hour. So that's locking out so many people, but I started out in the social work agencies. I miss my poor clients. I think everybody should have somebody to talk to on a bad day. So that's what we're doing with The Difference, connecting you with therapists in 30 minutes or less. Right now, we're just doing corporate clients, but the goal is to eventually just serve it to the people for under $100.
Can you just explain what The Difference does? Like, what is your elevator pitch? I know you just sort of gave it, but a little bit more fully.
Oh my God, I've been pitching all day. Well, yeah, so we built the first Alexa skill for therapy to connect you with a licensed therapist by phone in 30 minutes or less. So you'd go, Alexa, I'm lonely. Alexa, I have a pep talk. Alexa, where do I hide the body? And she'll go, don't worry about it. I'll call you on your phone. And she just fluffs you down and lifts. See, Alexa, stop. See, that's why we're moving off from that. She's very nosy. Privacy is a thing. So, but yeah, so now we're just doing it straight to consumer. You can just use it from our desktop app. But yeah, I'm really excited about making a very normalized experience. So like, on your own time, and I want it to be like the 90s where everybody talked about their therapist. And, just like Catie said, if we can get more nuance to the conversation, like nobody wants to admit they have anxiety. That sounds really intense, but financial anxiety is a total normal thing. Social anxiety is a normal thing. Performance anxiety, like those things are things that everybody has. So I think when you break it down rather than pathologizing it, like it's this like illness, because, everybody has circumstantial depression. It would be weird if you didn't feel bad, but clinical depression is a whole nother beast. And that happens to depression is usually related to feeling disconnected. That I can understand. Sure, I felt disconnected. And anxiety is related to uncertainty. Sure, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I should feel weird if things are out of my control. So that makes it more accessible. And I think when you start the conversation, it's easier for people to join it, which is why I love what they're doing with How Are You Really? Just really normalizing talking about bad things.
And Catie, just if you can explain the Mental Health Coalition, just so people know what it is if they want to pursue it after this.
Absolutely, yeah. So the Mental Health Coalition, we're comprised of about 25 national mental health resource providers. And we brought them all under one umbrella with the common goal of destigmatizing mental health. And there are all these incredible organizations that are doing wonderful work, that are sort of operating within their own silos. And the goal here is to aggregate the resources, to make them more easily accessible for everyone. So we launched a resource library, which you can access at thementalhealthcoalition.org, which is a library of all of our wonderful resource partners' resources. And then the goal there as well is to rebrand the vocabulary we're using to talk about our feelings. So everything that we've been discussing, figuring out how we can talk about it in a non-stigmatized way. And then separately from that, with How Are You Really? It is about storytelling, and it's about helping people find relief and catharsis through storytelling, but also highlighting specific individuals and communities' experiences whose voices are not as often or loudly heard. For example, back in June, we launched our first storytelling collection around frontline workers' mental health experiences during COVID. So these are individuals who have been the heroes through this all while we've been tasked with staying on our couches. And we wanted to shine a light on their mental health experiences and connect them with resources that are relevant to what they're experiencing, so that we can help them with that process, but then also educate our audience on the experiences that they're having. And since then, we've launched a few other collections, and we look forward to continue doing that as well.
Fantastic. So great. So I want to make sure people are going to start putting questions in for the panelists, and we will see them and I will ask them. And if you want to just, you can just write me personally and I will see a private question. So your name will not be used. So please feel comfortable asking anything privately. I just want to read something. I'm sure some of you saw this op-ed in the Times. I'm just going to read a little bit of it and let you each react however you see fit. This was by Catherine May, author of Wintering, The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times. And just a little bit of it here. Over the long summer, my brain gradually ground to a halt. At first, I thought it would pass. It did not. A fog settled, grew thicker. I felt slow and then slower and then incapacitated. I couldn't bear the thought of any more doing. I couldn't do. When I tried to work, my attention flitted away like the soft avoidance of two magnets. I was engaged in a process of perpetual forgetting. I would try to work and then find myself not working and wonder, dazed, what had happened in between. In all these months since COVID arrived, while I was trying to be defiant and industrious, I was slowly winding down. Time is slipping for all of us. November is almost over and it feels like we've skipped from one winter to the next without the intervening summer. So you can, I'm sure you've heard a lot of this, but I think it resonated for me of this just a little bit of kind of, feeling unmoored, I guess. Betsy, do you want to take a first crack? And if it, I don't know if it rang any bells for you.
Sure. And I'm going to answer this and answer Rabbi Buchdahl's question at the same time. The sense of being unmoored, any new trauma pulls up old trauma. Any new unmooring pulls up old unmooring. So that one of the things we find is that people who've been traumatized are more susceptible to further trauma. And that is, again, just the way our brains work. At the beginning of COVID, when we thought it was weeks that we were going to be in lockdown, many of us overperformed, produced, were incredibly efficient and effective, and then we were exhausted. And I think that part of what the author is saying there is at least much due to the disruption in our sleep, which is an inevitable part of trauma. Our brains are designed to keep us alive. And so one of the things they do is they mess up our sleep because, in fact, it's dangerous to sleep if you're in a situation where there is risk. So that our sleep cycles have changed, our ability to recover in sleep has changed. And that's all because our brains are trying to help us survive. And our brains are not saying, is this working? They're really just doing their job. This is, so our sleep is disruptive, our eating is disrupted. That's all about our brains doing their job. Yeah. In terms of Rabbi Buchdahl's question about
what it is, I'm going to read it. Okay. Rabbi Buchdahl is saying, what role do you think faith or religious life, and I think this means any, so it's not just this Jewish life, can play in someone's mental health? When does religion or faith support, and when can it be a crutch?
So the data seems very clear, but it's not necessarily predictive. So we don't actually know whether or not people choose to be religious because whether that's a choice or whether that's hardwired. It does appear that there's some genetic tendency towards religiosity. One of the things we do, and religiosity is different than prayer. It's the spiritual, there's a higher power thing. People who believe in a God, in any kind of God that is benevolent, tend to respond with less discomfort when bad things happen. Faith holds us even when the world is kicking us. That doesn't mean it holds everybody, but it holds us even when the world is kicking us. And so for many people, a religious orientation is helps them survive, not physically, but psychologically. We also know that people after trauma, that there's a very large subset of people who after trauma become more spiritual. So there's spirituality on both sides of trauma.
Great. Bea, I want to just ask, and feel free to answer anything that's been addressed, but Just someone asked in the chat about coping, like what that actually looks like. How do you answer that?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a really good follow-up to the op-ed. I hadn't heard that, but wow, was it accurate? Like the panic and the terror the more you read. But it's so true because again, we are in survival mode, and most people know the main two responses to survival, fight or flight. But there's also freeze. And that's exactly what happened to that woman, deer in headlights, just freeze. That's what happened to me, like literally from like June to September. Like if it didn't make me laugh or it didn't make me money, I just didn't answer it. It was like my spirit went on strike. I didn't have it in me. And that is the fourth one, which is fog. So there's fight, flight, freeze, or fog. And like once you identify which is your stress or trauma response, you can help design your own customized ways out of that kind of moment or that mindset. And so, yeah, I really think, again, it's about honoring all of that. And so coping is really just understanding what your triggers are and how they are usually resolved. So some people, when affected by things, they shut down, right? They just don't do anything. They stay in bed, they cry, they eat burritos. Some people overperform. There's a lot of people, especially in New York, especially in business, who use achievement as avoidance. And, they'll keep doing stuff. And so I actually see that somebody, Terry Rosenberg, is like, oh, you have a 1-bedroom and apartment with a baby? Y'all don't need to be doing more stuff at the end of the day together. Like you spent the whole day together. You find a way that you can spend time by yourself. Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't you feel like so? I mean, like, so there's a whole lot of shoulds, things that we should be doing. But one thing as an entrepreneur, I've just never respected rules for no reason. So now is the time to do what you need to do that will make you feel better. Nobody's going to judge you. Nobody's going to know. So find whatever works for you. But general coping is being really loving on yourself, giving yourself time and space, giving yourself touch and feel. They say 8 hugs a day is equivalent to 50 milligrams of Zoloft because it introduces oxytocin, which is the natural antidote to cortisol, which is a stress hormone. So the answer is always love. Every time you come to me, that's what I'm gonna say. And gratitude.
I love that. One thing, Catie, that you have talked about before, I think that just even saying how are you really suggests that we are taking care of each other to some extent, that it's not just about what we're feeling, it's that we are caring enough to ask, we're sort of holding each other in a certain way. Maybe there's different degrees. There obviously are of responsibility. Like, I'm not sure I want to take on someone's, pain to the point of Ben's feeling responsible if they're actually in trouble, like in danger. But I do love that the way that you frame that suggests that we should be paying attention to each other at the very least, even if we're not taking care of each other. Can you talk about that a little bit, that sense of, and obviously since we are a synagogue, we're a community, you sort of feel like even if we're not seeing each other, shouldn't we be checking in on each other, which we have been to some extent.
Absolutely. And the importance of that now more than ever. And as Bea said, like or whomever mentioned in the chat that you're living with your family and what you may need at the end of the day is alone time. On the other side of that, a lot of us are stuck on our own during this, and too much alone time can also, of course, be a problem in many other ways. So I think it's important for us to understand and internalize our thresholds when it comes to the sort of human connection that we need, and realize that all of our loved ones have a different threshold for that, but the need for us to really check in, because not everyone's going to come to you with the problems that they're having. And it's important that we check in regularly, that we ask the question honestly in a way that we're really looking to get a real response, and that we're ready to listen and hopefully be able to offer support and resources as well.
Wonderful. I want to read this question. How do we care for ourselves and also remain empathetic to others in our lives? Lost a loved one, closed a business, moved cities, wild year, but I've gotten to know myself better than ever. Something I'm struggling with, though, is drawing boundaries with other people. I've had to retreat from many relationships and focus on my core people, but feeling the tension from others who want more attention. This is probably relevant for many people: family, work, social. How do we assertively but kindly draw boundaries for ourselves? Who wants
I'll take that. Can I take that? I think that one of the things that has happened for many of us over the course of the last 9 months is that we have begun to realize how much time we spent doing things that weren't all that important to us. And so what that may lead to is a winnowing of my attention. That doesn't mean that the people that I winnow my attention away from, or the things that I winnow my attention away from, find that aren't uncomfortable with that. We know there's been a significant increase in divorce. There's been a significant increase in spousal violence and domestic violence and child abuse. Look, we are all under extraordinary duress, and I think that we are in many ways cleaning house, and saying these are the things that I really care about. Not everything I've spent my time doing historically is stuff I really care about. Add to that that none of us have ever spent this much time with the same people in our lives or alone. I mean, we are in relationships with people where we have never been so much in each other's faces. We have never been as isolated at the same time. So one of the things I want to think about the boundaries is that the boundaries you set today are not permanent, and they don't have to be firm. They can be simply what I can do today. So at a totally mundane level, I have begun using texting to say, I'm not where I should be to have this conversation with you. I know you called. I'm going to call you back in 2 days. Because that actually is a boundary that is self-care without being mean. I then have to call the person back, which sometimes feels burdensome, but I actually think that there are lots of ways we can set boundaries that are temporary and self-protective, and are in many ways, as Catie says, modeling healthy behavior. I can't do that now, but I will do that when I can. Yeah. And I think that, look, I think we should all be doing that. I think we should not be so busy that we can't breathe.
Yeah. Someone is asking, again, without a name, I've been in treatment for 40 years. I have had to up my weekly therapy appointments. People really don't want to hear your truth. How many people are crying listening to the four of you like I am? So first of all, I'm glad this person's been honest, and I wish that we could put our arms around them right now in a real way. But I think this person's getting at something real. So B, I'm going to give you a crack at this, which is that we're saying tell each other, we're saying ask each other, but the reality of that is not always that it happens or that it's genuine, and that people are really, really suffering and feeling very alone in it.
Yeah, people are suffering, people are isolated, even people in relationships can feel alone during an extended period like this, especially with no firm date. We're narrative creatures, right? We need a beginning, middle, and end. And without an end, we start to kind of lose a little bit. And so to the person who asked that question, I love you, and I'm really sorry you're having a tough day, but I hope it gets better, and I hope you can feel our love for you. And just a reminder that all this is temporary. But more importantly, all of this is about, it's just plain old burnout. We are burned out. So we don't have the capacity, we don't have the bandwidth for small talk or just text conversations and things like that. So to the person who asked about not telling people, we had a really great recommendation that says, hi, I'm busy today. Is everything good with you? Or also just in the spirit of how are you really, being honest. The more honest you are, the more empathy you will get. If you're just like, I'm just really foggy today, girl, I just can't do it. That's the whole point of this, telling people what's really going on with you. And rarely will they not understand. If they don't, that they're selfish, because if they're living with empathy, everybody has had that moment where you just find yourself staring at a wall during this year. So that's just kind of, honor that and be honest about it. And that way you teach people how to treat you, because otherwise you're going to start resenting them again if you're just overextending yourself when you just don't have it in you. So again, don't be ashamed of where you are, and just remind yourself that it's temporary. You will move through this. And in the meantime, how can you be honest with everybody who's affected by your mood?
Catie, I'm sure you've seen, as I have, there are people who just are resistant to getting help because they feel like there is just some kind of, again, admission, and even seeking it. with the resources that your organization offers, is there a kind of guidance as to when someone really needs a therapist, some treatment that's very individualized? Is there some sense of like, if you're feeling X, you should do Y?
Right now, we have a just sort of basic reference library where you can type in keywords, you can type in your therapy and find our recommended vetted resources. But we definitely, through our partners, have many. I think if you were to type in therapy in that library, you'd find content via our partners that are able to walk you through that process more thoroughly. We also are looking forward to releasing that sort of content ourselves in the near future. And I do want to mention briefly, because I know that they're members or representatives of these organizations or members of this congregation as well, but Child Mind and Jed Foundation are two of the Mental Health Coalition's founding partners, as well as National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and Crisis Text Line, which are great resources if anyone is in need of support.
Thank you for mentioning that. And Harold Koplowitz, who started Child Mind Institute, I interviewed last night for the LCLJ families, Dr. Harold Koplowitz, who, yes, is a congregant. And I just want to give a shout out to Phil Satow, who started the Jed Foundation in honor of his son, who took his own life. So thank you, Katie, for mentioning that. Just because you have raised it, and I think we have to touch on it, when someone might be crossing over to suicide ideation, which I don't want any of you to diagnose on here. It's too tricky a territory, obviously. But can you give us anything? Maybe start with Betsy as to when you think someone, like you talked about. I think you really described very well the difference between when you're sad and when you're depressed. What are for you the red flags if someone has a loved one where you say, this is not the person necessarily who is experiencing suicidal thoughts, but the one who's watching a loved one? When should we do something that is over and above you need to talk to someone? When is it a 5-alarm fire? Okay,
so the answer to that is quite simple. If you're worried about this, you should overreact, because you don't get a second chance to underreact. And so if somebody is talking about suicide, if you believe there is a real risk, don't be cautious and don't be polite. Are you thinking of hurting yourself, of harming yourself, of killing yourself? Those are really hard questions to ask, but they are very important questions to ask. I think that one of the really interesting aspects of COVID has been that there's been a little bit of a flip in amongst our adolescents, that the kids you never worried about before, who generally are extroverted and cheerful and happy and popular, are the ones that are suffering more now. And the kids who were sad and bullied in school, they're sleeping later. I'm talking about kids who are in virtual school at this point. A lot of the kids who were really unhappy in live school are much happier in virtual school. There's a change in their sleep patterns. They're not getting pushed in the hallway. They actually are feeling better. And the kids who really were fed by the social encounters and the emotional encounters in school are feeling worse. I said to a group of youth professionals recently that I want you to look at the ones you've never thought about looking at before, because I think those are the kids who are actually having a harder time. But when you're concerned about, when that feeling comes into your head where you say, what is going on here? Is this safe? I think you overreact. And look, we know that suicide is I think the second leading cause of death amongst adolescents. It is different in different communities. It's higher has historically been higher for males. It's evening out more now. It's higher for veterans. There's there are people who are at higher risk, and we are all at higher risk in trauma, which is where we live today.
You were just talking about, some of the more sort of successful, socially successful kids are in a way suffering more now. I'd love to ask Bea and Catie a little bit about social media for a minute. And just we're winding down on time, and I want to give you all a last word, but I do want to just address, because it was the lifeblood for so many people's lives in a way that was unthinking at this point, that dependence. And in some ways it was its own energizer and connector, and it had positive things about it. And it also made people feel really badly because they were always missing the party. It was always FOMO. Someone else was having a better vacation or having a better dinner out. And now there's been sort of a democratizing of isolation and inactivity. So do you see that affecting the landscape for your work?
I can start here from more of an anecdotal perspective, but I feel that, yes, we've seen this transformation, especially back in May, April and May, when everyone across the country was in a relatively similar lockdown, where for the first time you weren't swiping through people's vacation photos, and that wasn't the reality. But the version that people are putting out is still not necessarily the reality that they're living in most cases. And social media plays an undeniable role in the increase in mental health conditions that we're seeing in this country. And we are addicted to these filtered, perfect lives that we're able to scroll through, and being able to ostensibly live through these individuals momentarily and then feel worse about ourselves when we X out. I am very much addicted to social media, as I think most of us are, and I'm aware of it, but being aware of it does not allow you to actually make the difference. I think maybe it's the first step. But I think that now too, with how much screen time we have, this is how I communicate with my friends in a way that I wasn't pre-pandemic. And I think it's important that we just make a really conscious effort to close our screens, turn off our phones, and spend some time with loved ones if we're able to, or just even with ourselves in a book.
Great. Books. I forgot about books until this time.
Real deal, not electronic.
Tablet. Bea, do you want to address that at all? Social media, is that operating for you in your work?
Obviously, like even before COVID, depression rates were directly related to the last 10 years, whenever social moved mobile, whenever it was on our phones, like before it was just on desktop. I don't even know if y'all remember that, but now that it was constantly looking down, and also they designed it to be addictive, it's to never take your eyes out. Even Netflix came out and said it. They were like, we're not competing with Hulu. We're not competing with Facebook. We're competing with your friends and family, with time in nature, time in God. They want all of your time. And so this is I really do think that we needed to get sick of screens. I really do think we need to crave connection again. It takes a lot to get me on Zoom these days. So Abby's very persuasive. So, but, and just be kind and do the same for your kids. Get less time on screens. Please sleep with your phone outside of your room if you can. That makes it easier to sleep, except for TikTok. I like TikTok a lot.
So finally, I want to start with Betsy and then go to Catie and then Bea for a final word, as compressed as you can. But if you could give us one or two ways to just maintain, if not begin, wellness, however you define that. I certainly have gotten from Bea, even though I acknowledge that I am Abby, otherwise known as Baby, that she didn't challenge me to think differently. I'm being honest here, just about that sense of whether I'm even entitled to seek out those things that just kind of give me joy, even if they may not be productive things. So I am giving you a shout out for that, even though I'm also giving you grief. What do you do if someone's not named Abby? That's my question. Too perfect. So Betsy, why don't you start with just either one thought or two for wellness?
Thank you. So first of all, I think that forums like this are actually really helpful in terms of understanding that what I'm experiencing is not unique. It is personal, but not unique. I'm actually going to be doing a program with Rabbi Berman next Friday afternoon on trauma. So come back and we'll do a little bit more of that. I think if I were to give each one of us a gift, it would be simply to begin to think about what I've actually learned, not what I've lost, but what I've learned. What I've learned about other people, what I've learned about myself, what I've learned about my values, what I've learned about what gives me pleasure, but maybe even more so who I am at core. And I want to hold on to what I've learned in this. Churchill famously said, "Never let a crisis go to waste." And I don't want this to go to waste. I want there to be things that I can keep.
Thank you, Betsy. Catie?
Just going off of what Betsy said there as well, I think that it is so important for us to recognize what we've learned, and we've all learned something. I think also just the perspective that this is a global shared experience in one way or another, and we grow together through shared experiences. And though it doesn't feel like that every day, and we're all experiencing this uniquely, we still can relate to people across the world in ways that we haven't been able to before. And I think that's really special and something that grounds me. The other thing, just personally, and that I feel is really important with these lives that many of us are living on our own right now, is the value in routine and setting a structure for yourself and making sure that you're getting the sleep you need, you are getting outdoors, especially with the winter months upon us and seasonal affective disorder and what the darkness can do to many of us. Just making sure that you're getting outside when it is sunny out and bundling up, even though it's cold, and making sure to prioritize that.
Great. Thank you, Catie. And
Yeah.
Bea, take us home.
All right, y'all. This is just about healing. This is just about wholeness. This is about hope. And what's a fourth H thing? Happiness. So yeah, just really, again, take care of yourself, look after each other. If you're spending too much time alone, do your best to go out of your way to remind the people who you love and reconnect with them. If you're spending too much time with people, insist on your alone time. This will be over and you will be better for it, better on the other side of this. And yeah, that's life. Love it.
Thank you all. You've given us a gift tonight. I want to thank each one of you and turn it over to Rabbi Auerbach with one more shout out to Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, who really conceived all of this and knew it was important to do, especially now.
Great. Well, I know that that we're at the end of our program. I just want to say again how deeply connected we feel and want to feel to all of you in our community. If we can be of any help, whether it's just a new person to talk about your feelings with, or if we can connect you with resources, that is something that is really meaningful for us. So please do reach out. We're here for you. And I always try to find a blessing in any learning that I do. And so out of this time, I will hope for all of us that we can recognize the growth that comes from change, that we can listen hard to each other's stories and open our ears and our hearts to the truth that our friends are willing to tell us, and that we discover what can bring us that little bit of joy that lets us know that we are worth it, because that is what self-care is. So lots of love and blessings. Plug in your phone, not next to your bed. Go plug it in a different room, and don't check it when you get up in the middle of the night.
Right. Thank you all. Happy Hanukkah, happy holidays, whatever you're celebrating.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.